Hey folks, Jamie here. Thank you for tuning in. Before we get started, I would like for you to take a moment and go down below and hit the like and subscribe buttons. Maybe leave a comment. If you're really feeling generous, maybe share this video to your social media feeds. What that does is make it a lot easier for other people to find A Moment of Tiki. I really appreciate it and it helps out a lot. Thanks. Now, on with the show. Welcome to the 50th episode of A Moment of Tiki, coming to you from Lagoon of Mystery, my home tiki bar here in Central Texas. Nobody is more surprised than I am that we have reached the 50 episode mark. If you would have asked me back in 2020, I would have been completely shocked and floored. So this kind of calls for a special episode, so I'm going to try something a little bit different. Fingers crossed it works. Over the years, I've had several, not a whole lot, but enough requests for a tour of Lagoon of Mystery so people have a better idea of where I'm coming from and what I have done here. So rather than just give you a tour, I'm going to give you a tour while showing the evolution of the bar, how I turned this patio space into the tiki bar that it is now, in a step-by-step with some flashback photos and such. So fingers crossed that works. So let's get started, okay? The Lagoon of Mystery is built under a 65-foot covered patio. This is the first place, the first house my family and I have ever lived in that is designed to accommodate and host gatherings of more than 2 people or so. Back in 2016, my wife and I were floating in the pool, which is the lagoon, and she said to me, "Jamie, we need a tiki bar." So the very first thing I did was go online and go through various plans for standalone bars. Found one, made some adjustments, and this bar itself is what I came up with. And I thought I was pretty hot stuff at the time. I mean, how many people have a bar at their own home? If I'm being honest, that's probably as far as my experience with tiki would have gone. My wife and I spent the rest of the summer of 2016 floating in the pool. Sometimes I'd even make an extravagant cocktail like a rum and coke. It was then in December of 2016, I was on break from work, and for some reason, I can't recall why, I decided to see if anyone else had something as cool as a home tiki bar like I did. I went online and I was searching to Google and came upon this site called Tiki Central. And Tiki Central had an entire forum devoted to home tiki bar builds. I clicked on that and my mind was blown. So many people in California in particular, but then across the country and even overseas, had the most spectacular home tiki bars imaginable. And I took one look at my little standalone bar and said, oh, I really need to up my game. After I finished the standalone bar and realized I needed to up my game to even begin to call this place a tiki bar, I knew I needed a back bar. I'd never built something like this before, so I tackled it as best I could. I did the glue up, built the cabinet doors, left space here for a mini fridge. Helpful point, if you are adding a mini fridge to your tiki bar space, try to get one without a freezer section. I've learned that I hardly ever use that tiny little freezer section. It's not a very effective freezer section. The extra space would be better served for syrups and garnishes and other things that go tiki well. So I built a riser on the backside for rums and tiki mugs and other things like that. And What I'm particularly pleased with is the sink, which makes this a back bar, a wet bar. I was fortunate enough, there is a bathroom behind this wall, and so I was able to tap into the water. There's a utility sink behind this one, so they're all connected to water. So I was able to go through the wall, connect the water source and the drainage into the same point. For the sink itself, I wanted a giant clam. Obviously, giant clams have been illegal to import since the 1980s, so I went with the next best thing. I found a concrete mold of one. I sealed it. I added some mother of pearl acrylic to it to give it a little shimmer. Used a concrete drill to bore out the center hole for the drain. Found a bamboo looking faucet online, and now I have running water in my tiki bar. And I have to say, having a wet bar as your back bar really makes things a lot easier to clean up. Early on, I had no place to store my tiki mugs. Didn't actually have that many tiki mugs, but that was a big concern of mine, especially since there was no storage space out here and I wanted some place to display them. So I built these hanging cabinets. They have sliding plexiglass fronts to them. There's a plexiglass top on each, so the light from above can shine down in and illuminate them. And I've also added holders here for stemware. We're outside, so I don't use actual glass, but I have a lot of acrylic stemware, Poco Grande glasses, coupes, that sort of thing that have stems. The footer slides right in here, so they're easy to access whenever I'm making cocktails. Yeah, I'm still really happy. This is one of the first big projects I undertook, and I'm still really pleased with the way it resulted. An early project of mine were these light scones. They are underneath kind of an aged bronze copper Lone Star motif, very Western, very un-tiki. I didn't have a lot of money back then, not that I have a lot of money to invest in my tiki bar now at the big drop of a hat, but I wanted to do something to disguise them. So what I did was simply get some of the reed fencing you can find at home improvement stores, cut it to size, and wire it onto the outside of the metal scone. And it has served me well. At some point, I want to upgrade and get something a little fancier, a little something more explicitly tiki. But you know, for the past 5 years or so, these have served me really well. A project that was a little more involved than that was replacing this portal. One of the cool early features of this patio space was the round window into the bathroom. But again, it wasn't very tiki, and as I progressed in my build, it looked worse and worse in comparison. So I decided to replace it with a faux portal, mainly because I started trying to price real portals that were brass or aluminum, and they were staggeringly expensive, and none of them were large enough for this. So what I did was get a sheet of oak plywood, used my router to cut out the circular form, drilled out the holes for the rivets, which are wooden mushroom caps, beveled the edges, painted everything this brass gold color, and put it all together. It was a lot more difficult than that makes it seem. Don't use oak. Oak has a very pronounced grain. I got oak because it was hard and I wanted something durable. I probably should have gone with poplar, which doesn't have as distinctive a grain, which is a little softer of a wood. So it would have been easier to fill those pores, use sanding sealer to get a nice polished texture on it. As it was, I had to go over and over and over and over and over again on this oak to disguise the fact that it was actually indeed plywood, and that was a huge pain in the butt, and it took me several weeks of sanding and sealing and sanding and sealing and sanding and sealing. In fact, I painted this and mounted it and then took everything down because it looked like a painted hunk of wood up on there. So live and learn.
As I've said many times, the space needs to dictate a great deal of what the tiki bar is going to be, how it's going to look, what its personality is going to be. And in my case, one of the first examples of this was the ceiling. Being outdoors, I couldn't really go with the thatch and lahala. So instead, we went with the tried and true method, paint, and painted various images on the ceiling. I did an initial base coat of blue and then came back with a darker blue for the silhouettes. I think it turned out quite nicely. What's more, we have these projectors, these light projectors, which at night project an impressive ripple effect on the ceiling, which creates the illusion of being underwater. It's really nice and really effective and adds a lot to the space. Once I got the ceiling finished, it was time to replace the fans because the old fans that were white, quote unquote white before, looked dingy gray and pretty nasty. And so we got these really cool tropical looking fans, and I designed and installed the tiki-esque shade over them, which if you want to look, just check up right there and link to the episode where I discuss how I made these.
Another early project in the tiki bar was tikifying the speakers. There's a built-in stereo system that we had in here when we moved in, and like the walls, the speakers were kind of a dingy gray color. I found out when I took them down that reflected UV over the years had really made the plastic brittle, and it was crumbling and in bad shape. So it desperately needed something. Again, never underestimate the power of a good coat of paint. I painted tiki faces on both of them with some angular patterns on the side, and they've been working fine ever since. They blend in perfectly. Another fun project was the wall of skulls above me. I collected these simple $5 Halloween skulls over the course of 2 years, especially at clearance. I would find some places that had them marked down to half price. That was $2.50 each. I took them, I spray painted them gold. This was inspired by the very first tiki bar I ever visited, Pelikia in Dallas. It wasn't a very good tiki bar by any stretch of the imagination and almost put me off tiki entirely, but they did have some really cool decor, including a wall filled with golden skulls. I thought that was pretty cool, so I put my golden skulls up on there. I used a Dremel to carve out some of the teeth to make them unique and distinctive, and also drawing a bit from my childhood. How many of you remember the movie The Rescuers with the little girl Penny, who was sent down to get the giant emerald, not the emerald, a ruby from a skull? So I thought that was kind of a cool image. So I got some acrylic gems and glued them into the eye sockets on some of these skulls. Behind the skulls, I ran LED strips so that they're illuminated from behind with constantly changing colors. And I think that's a pretty effective effect. As I said earlier about the ceiling, you need the tiki bar space to dictate the form and personality of the bar that you develop. In this case, that impacted my choice of materials. For the wall, I decided I could not go with lahala or backback, two traditional wall coverings for tiki bars, simply because this is open air. It's sheltered, but it is still exposed to humidity, wind, insects, all manner of things that could degrade and deteriorate the wall covering. So I decided I was going to go with bamboo. For the lower half, I used bamboo panels. These are strips of bamboo attached to a fabric backing and rolled up, and you can just roll them out and attach them to the wall. I would drill pilot holes and then use small paneling nails to attach it to the wall. Carved out chair rails. Each one of these was a 6-inch wide, 1-inch thick piece of pine, just regular yellow pine, 8 feet long. I carved them out with a router and a Dremel. I torched them using a butane torch. I scrubbed them with a wire brush and stained it, and then finally applied a coat of spar urethane to preserve them. And for the top part, I used a woven bamboo panel. My thinking with this was that the bamboo would be much more durable because, after all, it is a type of wood. So we have bamboo tambour for the wainscoting and a woven bamboo panel, which is similar to lahala matting for the upper part, divided by a chair rail. And I have carved baseboards below. This has worked out well. The first couple of years, though, I will say that the bamboo weave developed a gray, sooty mold growing on it. I had to regularly treat it with mold armor. It's a spray that kills mold by its name. This came back several times, but after about 2 years, it stopped recurring. I suspect, although I am not 100% sure, and I'm by no means an authority, I believe that there were residual sugars in the bamboo that mold was feeding off of, and after a certain amount of time, there was just nothing left for it to feed off of, and that's why it stopped. But I have not had any problem with it outside since then. Additional decor you can see in here. I got a rattan circular shelf. There's various different pieces of decoration here and there. I'm not sure if you can see it on here, but there was a white globe light. I put a red bulb inside there and tied a net around it with rope, and now when it's illuminated, it looks like a red fish float. Creature from the Black Lagoon. It's a grave walker Halloween decoration, mold, injected foam rubber. It's kind of a hard styrofoam. It's very detailed, very impressive, and even though the Creature from the Black Lagoon in and of itself is not tiki, with the Lagoon of Mystery, you never know what you're going to come across, so it fits into the theme. And when it arrived, there was a damaged spot on its head that I repaired with a bit of epoxy and some paint, and while I was at it, I added a fish hook, and you've got the fish cork coming down off of that, so I think it lends him a little bit of personality. And finally, we have the cabinet that houses the aforementioned stereo system. I got some remnant pieces of tiki style fabric with some topper print and such off eBay, cut it to size, used spray adhesive, and finally coated it with a layer of shellac, and it has worked very well for me. This deck existed when we moved in, but it extended all the way to the fence at the time, and I'm afraid it wasn't taken very good care of. There were rotting boards, so I had to remove, disassemble the entire thing, separate out the good wood from the bad, make cuts, and replace some of the boards that were rotting through. Ultimately, I decided not to extend it all the way to that fence, which wasn't there, but cut it off about 3 feet short, so that I could have a tropical garden area right there. To keep people from falling off into the drop-off, I cut these columns. I had posts. I designed a pattern to route into them, and then drilled a hole through the center to run a rope. So now we have tiki posts and rope columns separating this so unwary guests don't accidentally fall off the drop. Hey, look who's here, apart from polka dots and Belle. It's the moai I carved with the chainsaw last year. Still holding up, doing its part to keep the lagoon tiki-fied. Part of what gives the Lagoon of Mystery its really cool tropical ambiance are banana plants that are growing along the edge. I started off with 2 banana plants, and this was before I even had tiki on the mind. One was a goldfinger, these taller ones, and a little bit farther over there is dwarf arenico. Started off with 2 banana plants, and now they have multiplied into this fantastic banana grove, which, gotta say, in the heat of summer gives it a really nice tropical flair. Highly recommended if you can swing it. Now, this being a covered patio, we had 2 large windows into my wife's photography studio that were unsightly. What could we do with them? Could we cover them up? So what we ended up doing, I think, was fairly clever. I don't know if it shows up very well here, but we found stock art, tropical beach scenes with palm trees and surf and blue sky online, took that stock art and had it printed out on vinyl sheets, essentially like a vinyl cling, and laid them down over the windows. That way, at night, when everyone is out here having a great tiki tropical time, we turn the lights on in the studio and these scenes are backlit, giving it almost a 3-dimensional effect. It's really kind of cool. Here, well, you guys know where we are right now. The lava wall is still holding up strong. It's a nice accent that kind of breaks up the progression of the Lagoon of Mystery. I'm very happy with it. Still not entirely happy with the LED red light display inside, but you know, when you're making it up as you go along, sometimes you experience those types of things. I'm sitting here in rattan peacock chair. I have 2 smaller peacock chairs flanking me, and what is cool about these is I found these on Craigslist. These were some of the earlier finds that I came across when I was first getting into tiki. It was a retired Army veteran who had gotten these while he was stationed in the Philippines, and they were cleaning out their old barn and wanted to get rid of them. And so I really lucked into a great find with these. They're in fantastic shape. So keep an eye on Craigslist. Also, after we had our first get-together around here, we realized that we needed more tables for people to put their cocktails on. And so I made several standing upright cocktail tables, as well as several of these end tables. Used a 4x4 piece of birch. These come in posts that are 8 feet long, and I cut several for about a 4-foot height, and I used the remnants for this. The legs are 2x4. The tabletop is prefab, pre-cut from Lowe's, but I distressed it. I cut grooves in the side for a tropical pattern, a primitive triangular pattern, and after staining and burning, or burning and staining, then I wrapped the base with wood, with rope, to give it that final aesthetic appeal. So a lot of this stuff here is built myself simply because either it didn't exist or I couldn't afford it. So, sweat equity counts a lot and goes a long way toward personalizing your tiki space. And here we are at my booth, which is one of my proudest additions to the Lagoon of Mystery. You've seen this before. I've posted several episodes from here at this table. Like the others, I made it myself. This booth, I always knew that I intended to have a booth at this far end to anchor the end of the Lagoon of Mystery, but I did not know where I was going to get one. I had resigned myself to having to try and build one when a Craigslist alert came through that a Fuddruckers restaurant in Houston had closed, and they were selling off all of their interior furniture, including the booths. They had several there. And after a quick calculation, they were asking $200, I believe. And I realized that I could not buy the lumber to build one for that price, let alone the vinyl, the springs, the cushion, and all the time it was going to take me to do it. So I shanghaied my brother Chris, who happens to have a trailer, and we drove to Houston one rainy Saturday afternoon and loaded it up in the trailer and brought it home. And I spent about 2 weeks cleaning, because even though it was in fairly good shape, it still had about 20 years of hamburger grease and other nasty stuff caked up in the nooks and crannies and crevices. So once I got all that cleaned up, I installed it, and here you see it today, hosting friends and family and get-togethers and goodness. Now, you also remember the episode where I built the floating deck, and again, this goes back to the concept of transitions in tiki, and the deck is elevated from the concrete floor at the end, and I think it just lends itself to the escapism, the otherworldliness, just to step up to get into the booth. Behind me, you see a bamboo screen. Hanging on the screen are 6 Chinese jade tiles. Oh, Miss Bell. I got these tiles piecemeal over the course of about a year from folks in Florida who were selling a large lot of them. In fact, these tiles came from the same stock that went to deck out Max's South Seas Hideaway up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So they have a pretty good pedigree. I cut and harvested the bamboo myself. You can look back to any of my bamboo episodes, and wired it all together, tied it up, It's aging a little bit, but it's still holding up. I think it adds a nice touch to the end of the lagoon. And eventually, at some point, I am going to build or buy or acquire something, a big face mask or a shield or something to really pop right here in this center section. But, no tiki bar was built in a day, and I still have a long way to go. But you have now seen where I started, where I came from, and where I've arrived at. Give or take, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. That's 6 years. 6 years working on my tiki bar. And no tiki bar is ever finished. I've done it one piece at a time. A lot of sweat equity. But I'm really happy with where we are right now. And the best time to start building your tiki bar is 10 years ago. But the second best time to start building your tiki bar is today. So if you've been harboring that desire to start making your own tiki bar, well, more power to you. Let's get after it. And even if it's just a coat of paint on the walls, that's a start. And I have learned that progress, no matter how incremental, is still progress. So, from me here at the Lagoon of Mystery to you, until next time we meet, aloha. Oh, you're still here. Okay, well, cool. I guess I would be remiss if I gave a tour of the Lagoon of Mystery and didn't explain the origins of the name of my home tiki bar. Remember when I said that I went on to Tiki Central in December of 2016 to look at all the different bars? I realized that these bars had really, really cool names. And I knew I needed to have a really cool name for my home tiki bar as well. Unfortunately, at that time in late December of 2016, about the same time I was looking at Tiki Central, Carrie Fisher died, and I was a big fan. I loved her as Princess Leia, as pretty much anyone of my generation did. But also, I really admired her as a writer. She was a very high in-demand script doctor in Hollywood, wrote numerous books, and honestly was a natural-born storyteller. And in fact, in one of the stories she told, I found hilarious, was a story where she went to a Star Wars convention and saw a life-size Princess Leia sculpture in the slave Leia costume that was anatomically correct. And so she immediately sat down and wrote a letter or called him up or whatever, George Lucas, and told him point blank, George, you may have the rights to everything of mine, but you do not have the rights to my Lagoon of Mystery. I thought that was hilarious, and so I purchased a photo of Carrie Fisher at the famous Rolling Stone photo shoot in San Francisco Bay, and I inscribed under here in wood, you do not have the rights to my Lagoon of Mystery, Carrie Fisher. So Carrie Fisher is the patron saint of the Lagoon of Mystery, and now you know the rest of the story.